Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 8th of November 2023, coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G7RP. Lovely to see you. On tonight's show, we welcome Bob HB9ASQ to talk about Swiss Radio International, the two Bobs and Italian Radio Relay Service. We share some of the pictures that you've sent us over the last couple of weeks. And we find out what on earth this is. Not too many entries so far, at least not many that we can mention. But if you think you know what that is, then please drop the note now on BATC or Facebook and we'll read it out when we get to the competition in a little while. But first, we have club news and our membership for 2024. Every November, the year before our year starts, we set a membership rate, and we had a committee meeting to discuss this along with our treasurer. And frankly, although our costs have increased significantly, especially things like room rental and insurance, because of the number of people that we have now being a member of NARC, so that's you, we thank you very much for that. We're able to keep our reduced membership up to 2024 as well for just £10 a year. As I said a year ago when we first announced this lower membership, you know, it's never been this low, probably since the 80s or so. So it's a great opportunity for us and to pass on that saving to all of you. And it's the one thing that all members can benefit from. So it's just £10. We've got a slide here to tell you how you can rejoin. If you're already a member, you don't need to fill in an application form or anything like that. If you're an existing member, all you need to do is pay, and ideally that's the way we'd like you to pay. By backs to those details. It's a business account, Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. There's the sort code and the account number. Please leave your surname and your call sign as the bank reference, or your first name or first initial and name if you haven't got a call sign. And please email the membership secretary at the email address you see on there, because quite often it doesn't always come through, the reference doesn't come through, and he has no idea otherwise who it's from. And we want to make sure, obviously, we register your membership. So please, all we can ask you all to do, if you're happy with Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, what it's brought you the last year, if you can all rejoin, then we can keep this subs as low as it is for a whole year's membership of Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. All these details are also on our website and also on the newsletters that go out every week. Thank you very much. Now some other club news, and from Malcolm G3PDH, the RSGB Autumn Series contest news, and NARC have a substantial overall lead already in the Autumn Series contest, with another good showing of 14 logs on data this last Monday. There are only 2 more contest sessions left in this series, with SSB next Wednesday the 15th of November, and then CW the following week on the Thursday the 23rd of November. So please keep those entries up, and we look like we're doing really well. Thanks for all your support. This coming Saturday, it's our Koblenz Sked, which is our monthly visit to our friends in Germany. 11th of November, as usual, it's on 7.123 megahertz from 10 o'clock UTC or GMT. Now we're back on local time, GMT, at 10 o'clock. And then just to give you the notice really, that on Christmas 2023 for the club, we're again having a club Christmas dinner at the Village Inn in Little Melton. We've been there for several years now, except the couple of years break with COVID. And it was very popular last year. I think we had 70 odd people there. So hopefully we'll have a room in our own. I'm still working at negotiating the last details with the venue, but it will be happening and it will be in December, and I'll let you know the date and how you can book your choice of meals and everything very, very soon, in the next couple of weeks for sure. Now back to members news, and firstly we've heard from Donard M0KRK. Now, as you may know, Donard is also a member of the Norwich Engineering Society, and I know some of you are as well. I am myself as well, and he's going to be giving a talk to NES members about his experiences so far with loop antennas. Now, the subject will be presented at a very simple level because not everybody in the audience is going to be radio amateurs. but it's going to be spiced up with cartoons and asides in the usual Donard way, which I'm sure you're used to, and it'll be a wonderful evening. And the invitation is there for NARC members as well to go as guests of NARC. You don't need to be a member of the NES to go. Now they now meet alternately online, and they also meet at CNS where we do. So, and this meeting is at CNS. It's next Monday, this coming Monday. It starts at 7:30, and it's in the same room as we meet at NARC as well. So you won't have any trouble finding it at all. And as I said, you're very, very welcome. There'll also be an opportunity to watch it on Zoom, and I'll be putting the details of that Zoom link on this weekend's newsletter if you can't make it in person. But I'm sure Dana would love to see a few friendly faces there from Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, as well as those of the Norwich Engineering Society. So good luck with that, Donard. Now, some pictures from two of our members. Firstly, as some of you may know, John 2E0TWQ paints, and I believe I'm right in saying, I think you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Tammy, that this is something that he sort of learnt relatively recently, that he had this skill. Is that right?
I'm pretty sure, yeah, he did, I think. Although John, I know, is on, so John, you can tell us.
Okay, but we're going to send you a couple of pictures, show you 5 pictures actually that John has painted over the last few months. These are all acrylic paintings, and as he says, maybe the JPEGs won't actually do them full justice because they're flat, whereas acrylics are quite vibrant, aren't they? They're quite sort of solid, they have depth.
They are, yeah. I do actually have one of John's paintings. I actually have 2.
Yeah.
And they're very nice, and there is depth to them.
Yes.
When you see them. You say the pictures don't really do them justice because they come off the surface.
This one, next one you're going to show, I love this one.
This one here.
Yeah. So well done, John. Thanks very much for sharing it. It's another hobby, and very, very good. Thank you. And next, Bob Cheese6PWS has also sent us some pictures. And this is the pictures here of a new resident bird on their feeding platform. He says he's not quite sure what it is, although he says unfortunately someone in the household set the camera to a lower resolution, so they're a bit small, but that's why we've put them on this. Now, I don't know if any of you watching can tell what that is.
Well, I know what the big bird is. It's a woodpecker. So we have one of those visit, but I don't know about the little bird.
The little one, I think, is me.
Yeah,
yes, I think that's what Bob means. The one in the bottom
yeah.
right, which is a little bit lower resolution, as you can tell.
I don't know.
Okay, well, anyway, if
bird.
anybody knows, it's a bird. I know it's a brown one. But anyway, Bob, thanks for sharing those. And also, he sent us some other pictures as well. And he says, in Scotland, my sister and family were having a meet at the beach and staying overnight. These are just a few pictures of the. And I'll come to my pronunciation expert for this.
I wrote this down. I think it's Almelvich Beach.
Really? Almelvich Beach. Okay, I hope that's right, Bob. With the added night shots of the northern lights from there. And he says, I hear that they were in most of the country, and I certainly in Norfolk got quite a few of them as well. I wonder what your pictures were like. If you took some pictures of the northern lights the other night, ironically, you and I didn't.
Yeah.
We missed it, which is ironic since we'd been to Iceland a few months ago and saw them there. But if you did, then don't forget to send them to us. In fact, send us any of your stories and your details to the usual address, radio@dcpmicro.com. We love to see your news, your pictures and everything, whether they're radio related or not. It's all about keeping the club together. Thanks very much. Tammy, over to you for your little people.
It's funny because our guest mentioned something when we were talking before, and I'd already picked this for today. It's saying, how do you know how you get the holes in cheese?
Oh, good. Oh, well, Bob will appreciate this. Being from Switzerland, yes, absolutely. He didn't know you. I didn't know you were going to do this. Is that Tom and Jerry by any chance?
I think it might be, yeah.
Well, this all comes from a website called miniature-calendar.com, as you know, and they use just simple things like that, letter punch, to show wonderful pictures.
That's not depicted right though, because if that was in our house, the cat would be eating the cheese.
That's true, and the mouse would be running away and probably looking from behind in a worried way. Anyway, it's really nice. Thanks very much for picking that for us, Tammy. So I said, please do keep in touch with all the good pictures and news and stories. We do love them, and we'll be back again in a couple of weeks as well, when my voice should be better. Anyway, let's have a look at that competition that we set a couple of weeks ago when we asked you, what on earth is this? Now, we did have some entries.
We've got one entry online.
Oh, have we?
Mike G8EY. I reckon it's a thingy for getting hair out of a plug hole.
It could be.
A
And
thingy.
it could be that. It could be. Let me tell you what other people thought. Bruce G4KZT says, I think the object is a finger toothbrush for pets.
Colin M0GMK. This week's object is a finger toothbrush for cleaning pets' teeth. Good luck with cleaning a cat's teeth.
Yes, quite. I don't think... Do you fancy doing that with
Oh,
our cat?
I don't think...
No.
I think the claws would be in my arms.
I think so. And Tom GXQD says, well, this time I think we have a finger stool designed to remove pet and other hair. So that's not quite right, is it, really? Maybe? Well, I haven't told you what the answer is yet. Anyway, he has put here, though, it's made me laugh, a bobbly version of which bankers used to have for counting notes before banks became an endangered species.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh,
I've
a little
got
bit
one of those at
political there.
home.
Have you?
Yeah, one of the little knobbly things that you put on your finger to count things. Yeah. Used to
Okay.
have
Yeah,
one.
oh, yeah, I see what you mean. They use them
Yeah,
in post
like a little
offices
rubber
and things.
thing, yeah, to count
All
stuff.
right. Anyway.
Bob
Oh, right.
G6PWS says he think it might be a bottle or glass washer. I've seen those where you put them in, don't you? And you
Oh,
turn
yes.
them.
Yeah, clean them up.
Yep.
Well, we better tell you what the answer really is, because it is.
It is. It's a doggy toothbrush.
It is. And who else but Steve G3EVA and Alfie sent us this picture of it in use. Goodness me.
Got his tongue hanging out there. He always
It
likes
was-
the taste of it.
He's just beating the whole thing, I think, with our cat. Anyway, thank you very much for sending that, Steve. Only 4 entries if we include the ones online as well. Brilliant. Okay, let's
Look at next week.
look at next week's. I'm glad you said that. Let's have a look. I should read my own script, really, shouldn't I? Let's have a look at the next week's question and ask you, what on earth is this? Now, we normally in a picture like this sort of doctor it a little bit and maybe blur a few things, but we haven't here. Because we thought, even if you don't know what it is, being radio amateurs, most of you, you will give us a good imaginative answer of what you think that is. So, there we are. It's got 2 controls there. If you can't quite read it at home, we've got frequency on the left and power on the right.
It just says freak and purr.
Or freq, all right, fair enough.
Purr.
Yeah. Power,
Purr.
purr, okay. But what do you think that is? Or what do you think it's for? Have you any idea? Or would you like to make a suggestion? Please send us your answers to radio@dcpmicro.com. You've got just under 2 weeks and we'll read the answers, obviously all your answers, and next time we meet for NARC Live. I've got a real crackle in my earpiece, Tam. I thought I'd better tell you. It's putting me off a little bit, but yeah, that's okay. I'm sure it will resolve. Anyway, thank you very much for all your entries for that, but say only 3 entries this week, although they did all get them kind of right. So we hope to get your entries for the next one. Just to let you know now, before we meet tonight's guest, what is coming up with the club this week. On Saturday, it's our monthly visit to the Koblenz at 10 o'clock, as I said earlier. On Sunday, the GB2RS News is on GB3MB repeater at 7 o'clock. On Monday, the Monday Night Net, also on GB3MB at 7:30. And at 8 o'clock, the 80 metre CW Net on 3.543 megahertz. And then next Wednesday, a week from tonight, the November the 15th, we meet at the Sixth Form Common Room of CNS between 7 and 9:30. And it's a social informal evening and also Bright Sparks for our younger members, the last Bright Sparks of this year, would you believe? Can't believe I'm saying that, really. And as I said, please do keep in touch. Send us your details of all your news, send us your pictures and things. And also, of course, we're always happy to send this card to anybody you feel will be cheered by a card from Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. We'll add your name to ours and post that off with great pleasure. So now let's meet our special guest this evening. Our guest is Bob, HB9ASQ. He's a native of New Jersey in the US, but living in Switzerland since 1970. Originally licensed as a novice as WV2 UPQ, and then in 1961, Bob was licensed as HB9ASQ in 1971 and has been active ever since. Bob's special interest is audio processing and rag chewing, but as well as ham radio, Bob has had a very varied career in broadcasting too, combining professional radio with his hobby. So I won't say any more because I don't want to spoil his presentation. Just to say hello to Bob, and welcome to NARC Live.
Thank you very, very much, David, and also good evening to Tammy and all those who are joining us this evening. It's a thrill and I must say an honor to be able to talk to you this evening. And I want to thank you very, very much for the invitation. Also mentioned Roger, G3LDI, whom I think was the first to contact me about this. And during the preparations leading up to this presentation this evening, we've had a wonderful relationship. Everything has gone very, very well. And again, thank you very much for the invitation. You can't see it too well. I put on my Jaguar jacket this evening just for the occasion. I don't have one. I mean, I have a jacket, but not a car.
Okay.
My son-in-law worked for Jaguar Switzerland, and he was kind enough to give me one of the jackets. We also have a connection to Norfolk. We have a Norfolk Terrier, and his name is Sparky, appropriately enough.
Well,
my wife,
I must ask you, did you know what that little magic device was, the competition entry then? Do you use one of those on your dog, Sparky?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask because I have no idea,
No, okay.
Really, absolutely no idea whatsoever. I'll be following the entries to see what it actually is. My guess is something to do with sound that maybe dogs can hear, something high pitched. I don't know. That's just my guess, and I'm sure we'll find out.
Yeah, you'll be able to see the solution of the mystery object for next week, for the next show later on. But anyway, Bob, we'll let you on with your talk. We're going to play some slides out as well under your cue. So over to you, and we look forward to your story.
Thank you very, very much, David. By the way, I'm looking at myself, and I have a color of a beet here, and believe me, I don't have this color normally. I think it's the bad lighting or something. I just bought a new webcam for the presentation this evening. Maybe it's not quite balanced, but I'm not suffering from high blood pressure or anything like that. It's just the lighting, I think. Okay, well, where do I begin? I guess the best place is the beginning. And you did mention it in your introduction. I am a native of New Jersey, just outside New York City, about 13 miles west of New York City. I was born in Paterson, New Jersey, like Lou Costello of Abbott and Costello. I'm sure you know them in the UK. And I grew up next door in Hawthorne, New Jersey. I went to school with Debbie Harry of the Blondie, if that means anything to anybody. It dates me a little bit. We went to school together in Hawthorne, New Jersey. I got interested in radio, really ham radio and shortwave radio back in the 1950s, the late 50s, maybe about 57, 58. My grandfather, I have to credit my grandfather with getting me involved in radio. He was not a ham, but he was an avid shortwave listener. And we're going back to the 1930s and 40s. And he had one of these big Crosleys. I don't know if you know that brand in the UK, but one of these big wooden consoles with big booming woofer speakers. And when the sound came through, the whole room shook, and he was telling me stories about how you could hear the whole world on shortwave, and it was fascinating. So he introduced me to it, and I went up to his house. He had a big antenna strung in the back, a wire antenna, and I turned it on, and I couldn't hear anything. I could only hear the local medium wave radio station, a 50 kilowatt station, WABC on 770. Line of sight from Hawthorne. So I obviously didn't get too excited about that. Well, to shorten the story a little bit, which is very difficult for me at the best of times, one morning, I guess it was about 1959, maybe. Yeah, about 1959. It was Christmas morning. I came downstairs, and under the Christmas tree was this box. It wasn't wrapped. And on the box, it said, Helicrafters. Helicrafters. An S-38E, not the D, Delta, but E, Echo, the latest model shortwave radio with medium wave. And that's what really got me involved. I spent days upstairs listening to radio and hearing exotic stations from all over the world, and of course, radio hams. And I listened to 80 meters, 40 meters. Of course, in those days, everything was AM. Short sideband only came in much later, and it was very easy to listen to them. And it was fascinating. They talked about all kinds of things, real rag chewing, and that's what really got me going. So in '61, as you mentioned in your introduction, I took the American novice test, which doesn't exist anymore. It was similar to your entry level or foundation license that you have in the UK, except the American novice was limited to 1 year only, and CW only, or VHF. And we were allowed 75 watts input. Everything was input in those days. Thankfully, everything has changed to the more logical measurement of output rather than input. But anyway, that got me going. I was doing code for a while, and then I really wanted to do phone. So in the New York area, there was always something going on 2 meters. It was AM. Everything was AM. I had an old Heathkit tour. I'm sure some of you remember the Heathkit. I should have switched this off. I'm sorry. But anyway, a Heathkit tour, a super regenerative radio receiver. No selectivity whatsoever. Very sensitive, but no selectivity. It didn't matter because in those days there were so few stations on, and I had a little homemade dipole up on my room, and I could talk to a few people. And then one thing led to the other. My novice license expired, so I had to take the technician license, which was VHF only, VHF UHF at the time. And that got me from WV2 UPQ to WA2 UPQ. And then after a couple of years, I was working 6 meters and 2 meters AM, which was a lot of fun. 6 meters was a great band, especially when it opened. But then I really wanted to do HF. And I went to New York. You had to go to the Federal Communications Commission field office at that time, which was in New York. And I went with a friend of mine, and we took the general test together. 13 words per minute code test, and then the 50 question and answer, rather multi-choice questions, and we got it. So I was WA2 UPQ general. And then when I got to Switzerland later on in '71, I could trade that license in because the US and Switzerland had reciprocity at the time, still do. And I'll get to that story in just a few moments. But in the meantime, I was in school studying broadcast journalism and communication arts at the New York Institute of Technology in New York. And through a ham friend, I got involved in a college radio station, not New York Tech, it was another one, Uppsala College in East Orange, New Jersey. They were looking for people to do radio programs. And I always was interested in broadcasting. I just somehow felt it was in my blood. It was my calling, my métier, my dharma, whatever you want to call it. And so I landed a Friday night program there doing talk radio, having discussion programs about all kinds of things, mainly the offbeat or the paranormal, flying saucers and witchcraft and demons and spiritualism. That was the thing in New York at the time. It was very popular. And I was always personally interested in those things and still am, as a matter of fact. So to jump again to the chase, so to speak, I had a chance after a couple of years in New York Tech through a friend in Sweden. I had a chance to spend some time in Stockholm and to do what they call a practicum, practical academic work, hands-on, so to speak, at Radio Sweden in Stockholm. And that was 1967, 1968. And I have, you won't believe your eyes, there's a photo of me, a very young Bob in 1968, posing in the studio of Radio Sweden in Stockholm. I worked there as a freelancer in the English service. And the head of the English service, by the way, was Sidney Coulson. He was English and a former BBC man. And I also had a chance to work with a great name, one of the great names in DXing, Arne Skog. And he was probably the most famous, one of the most famous European DXers at the time. And he did a weekly program called Sweden Calling DXers. And I was privileged to be able to voice that, to read the script, along with doing other things for Radio Sweden, doing basic reports and all of that sort of thing. By the way, I didn't see the photo come up, but I assume it was shown. Maybe it just is off my screen. There it is. There it is. Oh, who's that handsome devil there? That was me. Hard to believe, back in 1968. So moving on, I met my wife-to-be in Stockholm. Another long story. They always are. Introduced by a Swiss fellow who used to work with her. She was a microbiologist at the Royal Veterinary Institute in Stockholm. And I lived in a villa, a glorious sounding place. It was on the Baltic, right on the water in Stockholm. And I had a small room there in this villa. And he introduced me to my wife, Kathy, and one thing led to the other, as they very often do. And she said after a while, we became very close, and things developed, and the chemistry started to develop. And she said, I really would like to go back to Bern. And I had been in Bern in 1964 when I visited Europe for the first time. I was here for 10 weeks. I actually arrived at Prestwick in Scotland, and then spent a few days there in Edinburgh, and then came down on the Flying Scotsman. That was quite a memorable trip, 5 hours, I think, to London. Spent a few days there, and then moved over to the continent. And getting back to Sweden and Switzerland, this was back in 1968. So I said, okay, Kathy, I've sort of had enough of Sweden myself. I had a little Volkswagen Beetle. I said, why don't we drive back to Bern? I like Bern. I was there, a beautiful town. And, we'll go down and see what happens. So we drove down through the Norwegian mountains, which was an adventure, and down through the continent, Germany, and then into Switzerland. And I visited Swiss Radio International at the time, out of curiosity. It was called SBC, Swiss Broadcasting Corporation, the European Overseas Services, SBC for short. And I visited the head of service there, and I said, gee, I would love to work for you. And he said, well, we have nothing at the moment. And I said, okay, fine, maybe in a couple of years when I finish my studies. He said, yes, we'll keep you in mind. So I landed a job doing some assembly of electronic equipment in an electronics firm in Bern for about 6 months. And then Kathy and I said, I said, look, I'd like to get back to school. I want to finish my studies. how about coming back to New York with me? And she was a bit reluctant. She did speak a little English, but not very well. She was an English student of mine in Stockholm. That's actually how we met. So we said, okay, why don't we go to Montreal? Montreal is a francophone. She spoke fluent French, being Bernese. The languages here are German and French. And she would feel more at home, a more European atmosphere. So we said, okay. And I said, look, Loyola, Concordia University, Loyola College, Montreal, has an outstanding communications arts program and broadcast journalism. I'll finish my studies there. So that's it. We went up there, and one thing led to the other, as they do. I worked for a time, burning the candle at both ends, studying, and also working for CKGM, an all talk station in Montreal, doing talk radio. And after a couple of years there, I really felt I wanted to come back to Europe. I missed it. I just felt the calling of Europe. And I liked the international living. I liked the continental life. I enjoyed languages. I had learned several languages I could handle. And I wrote to Swiss Radio International just out of the blue. The little voice said, write to them. And I did. And I got back a letter from the director, Joel Kirchhoff, and he said, well, you have quite interesting credentials. Our new head of service, Mike McMahon, a Canadian, is taking over. We're changing our format from recorded programs to live programs, and with an accent on news and current affairs. And he said, I will pass your letter along to Mike. And I waited for a while, and I got a letter back from Mike McMahon saying, you've got the job. You have the credentials, you've been vetted. And when can you start? I said, well, whenever you want me. They said, okay. They sent a contract. You can start on the 1st of April, 1970. So they sent me a plane ticket on Swiss Air at the time, which still existed, and flew over on the 26th of March, 1970, arrived on the 27th, and I started work on the 1st. No April Fools. It actually did happen. And that was the beginning of my career and my life in Switzerland. As it is now, I've spent more time in Switzerland than I have in the United States. I'm really very much at home here. 4 children. We have 7 grandchildren, another one on the way, due in January 2024. And I was a full-time job at Swiss Radio International. I loved it. I did everything. You know, we were a small group in the English service. We were from all different backgrounds. I had colleagues and friends from England, from Scotland, names you probably would know, who went back eventually to England to work for the BBC, for example. I could go through the names. There's no point now, but we were a wonderful group, and it was like a holiday for me. It wasn't a job. I enjoyed every moment of it, traveling all over the country, reporting on current affairs in Switzerland, doing feature programs about Swiss life, Swiss culture, and so on. And it was just a wonderful time. I was with Swiss Radio International from 1970 to 2002, 2 years before the end of SRI. It went QRT in 2004. Unfortunately, but I'll mention that maybe in a little while, touching on the subject of the demise of shortwave radio. But something happened right at the beginning when I arrived at Swiss Radio International. They got wind very quickly of the fact that I was a radio ham. And maybe someone listening or watching this will remember Bob Thoman, HB9 Gulf X-ray, the Swiss shortwave merry-go-round. And he started that program back in the 60s. And he did it for a long time with David Simmons. He was English, David Simmons. David Simmons was really, he was interested in shortwave. He was never a ham. He was mainly a disc jockey at heart. He went to Radio London when it was legalized back in the early 70s. And, well, he created a void. And so the management of SRI liked the two-voice format of the Swiss shortwave merry-go-round, which was a technical mailbag. You know, people wrote in with technical questions about radio. You know, what is the ideal shortwave radio antenna? I hear funny noises on my radio. What is this noise? Can you identify it? You know, this sort of thing. And so they said, Bob, you're a radio ham, right? And I said, yeah. Well, we'd like to team you up with Bob Tolman, HB9GX. That was not my main job at SRI, but it's something that just fell in my lap through circumstances. And that was the beginning of what became known as the two Bobs. Bob Tolman, HB9GX, Bob Zanotti, HB9ASQ. And we did that program for 24 years until they gave it the hatchet, unfortunately. And their reason, I think, well, they were going satellite at the time, and they didn't believe, they thought that shortwave was ending and there was no interest in shortwave anymore. And it was a pity. But anyway, we had a great run together, and Bob and I, we were just made for that program together. We were friends. We were real friends, not colleagues. We were friends from the beginning and all through. Unfortunately, Bob went silent key about 5 years ago, and it was a great loss. He was a great guy. We had all kinds of fun things together. We went glider flying together. We recorded programs up in the air. I mean, we did crazy stuff. He went into the hospital once for a gallbladder operation, and we never missed a program together. He did it by telephone from his hospital bed. It was just wonderful. We had such a following. One of the greatest compliments we ever got was from a BBC World Service producer. Remember, not Medium Network. That was Radio Netherlands. Waveguide. Waveguide was the BBC program. I don't remember the name of the producer, but I met him at a meeting in London one time, and he said, "You know, Bob, I've got to pay you a compliment. Those two Bobs, you're absolutely inimitable. We tried. We brought in a second voice. We tried imitating you on Waveguide. You can't be imitated. You are unique." And that was a great compliment. There we are. That's Bob Tolman on the left, and my good self there on the right. That was taken in 2004, and that was after the end of the Swiss shortwave merry-go-round. We got together at Bob Tolman's shack. You can see all of the stuff in the background. He had a real shack full of junk and just the kind of shack that I like. And we got together. This was a picture we took in 2004 because we got together for my website, switzerlandinsound.com, switzerlandinsound.com. When I left SRI and SRI went QRT in 2004, I decided I needed something to do, and nobody was doing radio from Switzerland anymore. It was a shame. So I said, I'm going to start a website. I started switzerlandinsound.com. And there's so much on there. In fact, I'm still doing it. Places to go, interesting people, some archive stuff left over from Swiss Radio International, and the two Bobs. This was a QSL card, by the way, for 30 years of the Swiss shortwave merry-go-round, 30 years commemorating 30 years of Bob Tolman and the merry-go-round. I had not been with it for the full 30 years, as I mentioned before. I don't remember the year when this went out, but this was sometime, I think, in the early 80s. And On my website, switzerlandinsound.com, we have all, and it's not a lot, but it's substantial, the last surviving original recordings of the Swiss shortwave merry-go-round and the two Bobs off the air, including the very last show. And then, as we saw in the other picture, and I mentioned a moment ago, we got together and I said, I called Bob one time and I said, hey, Bob, why don't we get together and do some more two Bobs? Let's keep it alive. So there's a section on switzerlandinsound.com entitled The Two Bobs. And you'll find all of it there. We talk radio and ham radio and just doing our thing the way it was. And it every once in a while, we had a lot of following in the UK, especially a lot of letters from the UK. And we even had visitors from the UK and from other countries too, from the States, but a lot from the UK. They would come by. And every once in a while, on 40 meters especially, not only on 20 meters sometimes, I'm on 40 meters almost every morning, sometime late afternoon. And I love to talk to the UK. And every once in a while, I'll answer a CQ. And they'll come back and saying, aren't you one of the two Bobs? And I tell you, that is really an honor. It is really flattering to be remembered after so many years. And I've had emails here. People have told me on the air, the two Bobs got me interested in ham radio. It was so much fun to hear you talk about all this technical stuff. I really got interested, and I have you to thank for getting me into ham radio, and that's a wonderful thing. That is really wonderful. I used to tell Bob, he was ailing. He was not well for several years prior to his death, and we talked on the phone occasionally. I never saw him again in person. He didn't want any visits because he was really in poor shape. But I would write to him. I write emails or I'd call him, and I would tell him, "Hey, I just talked to somebody on the air," and he said, "Send my regards to Bob Toman," and he was thrilled by that. It really, that was a thrill for him. And the days of shortwave, unfortunately, as we probably all know, are not what they used to be. It's a hobby horse with me. I'm not the only one, not only because of nostalgia, but I really and truly believe that the end of shortwave was a terrible mistake. What happened was, in my analysis, my feeling, and I've said this before, 1989, November 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. And before that, everybody and his brother and his dog had a shortwave station. Every country had to have one. And it was always the same thing. We want to show the world that we have an independent culture. We're not West, we're not East. We are who we are. And, everybody wanted to present themselves on shortwave. And shortwave was very, very much in. And shortwave was very much alive. We're talking about the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s and 90s, as a matter of fact. But then, well, what shall I say? The bean counters came in, the technocrats, and they looked over the thing and they said, this is costing us a lot of money. Costs a lot of money to run transmitters and all of this sort of thing. The internet is coming up and satellite is coming up. We really don't need shortwave anymore. So that was the beginning of the end of shortwave. I'm sorry to say that Swiss Radio International was probably the first major shortwave station to close. And I and others like me warned against this. We said, you're putting all of your eggs in the internet basket. Anyone who believes the Cold War is over is a fool. I'm sorry to put it that brutally, but that's what I really believed. And I don't want to say I told you so, but most recent events of the last few years have proved that that is true. We're in a new Cold War. Even Russia says it, America says it, the West says it, everybody says it. And now we're left without shortwave, which is the only way to get the message through when everything else fails. Look now in the Middle East, the war in the Middle East. We have a war in Ukraine. We have problems in China. We have problems in Africa, the Middle East. The internet has been cut off. People have been cut off. There's no communication. The only way to get a message through is still shortwave. But where are the transmitters? They've been dismantled. They've been destroyed. The BBC World Service is still around. There are a few voices here or there. But in times of emergency, the only way to get messages through is HF, amateur radio, and shortwave broadcasting. And I think it's very important that our governments, our administrations, and our politicians realize that in times of crisis, only amateur radio and shortwave broadcasting gets the message through. And I think some lobbying should be done in our favor in that respect. It was a mistake. I'll move on. There was a photo, by the way. Did we show it before? Swiss Radio International, 1982. There was a photo of me interviewing. Had a lot more hair then, naturally curly hair. There we are. There he is, with a Kudelski Nagra tape recorder, the standard thing there. With there I was interviewing a visiting British dignitary. And I don't remember who he was, I'm sorry to say, but he was a distinguished British official who came to visit Interlaken, Switzerland, for some major event there. I would recall that it was actually you British who opened tourism in the Bernese Oberland. It was Sir Arnold Lunn who pioneered skiing in the Bernese Oberland. It was unheard of. The Swiss didn't ski at that time, but Sir Arnold came to Wengen in the Bernese Oberland near Interlaken and started the Inferno race. And his son, I believe it was Adrian, I'm not sure. I interviewed his son. They were responsible for bringing tourism. It was part of the Grand Tour that all distinguished English gentry had to partake of. They came through Switzerland. It was a part of the route. And they really opened Interlaken. And that was the reason, one of the reasons why you'll find, for example, all around Interlaken in the Bernese Oberland, hotels like the Victoria Jungfrau, which was actually built in honor of Queen Victoria. And she finally stayed there. Then there's the Bristol, the Derby, all of these English names in honor of the British tourism, which opened up, or British tourists who opened up tourism in Switzerland. And that's why we had a lot of visiting dignitaries from the UK coming to Switzerland. And this was an interview. I don't know who took the picture. Someone did. And that was me, 1982, with a lot of naturally curly hair. That has changed over the years. I'm 80, I'm not 80, oh my God, God forbid, not quite. 78 at the moment, by the way, just for your information. 78 and getting older every day, as we all are. Memories, 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 and they're very, very real. If you're interested in this, if you miss Swiss Radio International, if you'd like to hear more of what the kind of radio that we did on Swiss Radio International, switzerlandinsound.com. I really hope you'll visit it, and don't miss the two Bobs. I think as hams, you'll really appreciate that. After Swiss Radio International, this was back in around 1987, 88. What shall I say? I told you before how much I enjoyed my work at Swiss Radio International, but it became too much of a routine. We could do it in our sleep, you know. The current affairs program called Dateline, Hello and welcome once again to Dateline. This is Bob Zanotti in Bern. Today we're talking with Arnold Hottinger about the latest developments in the Middle East. And then we jump to China, and on and on and on. But first, here's Cullen Farmer with the news. We could do it in our sleep. And I always dreamed of having my own station. And enter the Italian radio relay service. Now let's go back to the 80s. The Wild West of radio was Italy at the time, because in those days, any Italian citizen was allowed to open a radio station. The Constitutional Court decided that every Italian had a right. It was part of freedom of speech. Everybody had a right to a radio station. So I'm not an Italian. I have an Italian name. My grandfather was from the South Tyrol, Bolzano. And my grandmother was from Cavallese, farther down in the Trentino. But I don't have an Italian passport. But anyway, I had this idea one day, back at Swiss Radio International. A friend of mine who ran the transcription service came by and said, "Oh, Bob, we had a visit from an Italian today from Milan. His name was Alfredo Cotroneo. And he runs an FM radio station in Milan broadcasting English programming. He rebroadcasts the BBC and all kinds of other English language programming, and he asked if we could offer something to him." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." Well, I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in synchronicity. Enter C.G. Jung. I'm a great believer in C.G. Jung's theory of synchronicity. It's worked in my life many, many times. I'm sure it exists. And so enter Alfredo Cotroneo. I said, do you have his contact information? He said, sure. I gave him a call. And I said, I have an idea. Confidentially, I have an idea about opening a shortwave radio station in Italy. We could do it. And he said, hey, that's an interesting idea. Come on down, we'll discuss it. So my wife and I, Kathy, and I, it's only a couple of hours from here down to Milan. And we drove down one day and we had a chat with Alfredo, and I told him my idea and he loved it. And so to jump over a few important but lengthy details, we needed we needed a location. And Alfredo put an ad in several of the local newspapers around Milan, and he had several offers. One of them was even a convent somewhere, but the terrain was not ideal for HF. So I came down one day, spent a couple of days going around looking at these possible sites, and we went down the list. No, too rocky, not flat enough. No, not this one. And he says, well, we got one more on the list. It's in Ropecco sul Novillo. I said, okay, west of Milan. Maybe about 15 miles west of Milan, 20 miles, not 15 maybe. So we went out there, and there it was. Our dream come true. A farm. The owner had answered the advert. There it is. That's the aerial view of our transmitter location. In the middle of nowhere, next a very, very high ground conductivity, groundwater, a nearby river, flat as a billiard table. Absolutely perfect. I said, Alfredo, we have found our location. Well, we needed a transmitter. Enter Bob Toman, HB9GX again. We went around looking at transmitters. Swiss Radio International had, well, we'll get to those photos in just a moment. Swiss Radio International had the main transmitter plant, as the professionals call it, transmitter location at Schwarzenburg, southwest of Bern. I used to go there all the time. I knew all the guys. And we knew they were selling off some old Siemens transmitters, 20 kilowatts, but they were too big. We couldn't use them. So we didn't know what to do. I mentioned it to Bob Tolman. Now, Bob Tolman had a day job. He was a supervisor at Hotel Echo Bravo, which was the, it's QRT now, but it was the aeronautical HF station based in Bern. And they had two 10-kilowatt Siemens transmitters at Schwarzenburg, where SRI had its main transmitters, our 250 kWs there, a number of them, and a 300-kilowatt Marconi. And they also had these two Siemens transmitters there for HEB, Hotel Echo Bravo. And Bob said, oh, they're going to sell them. They're going to buy new ones. They're moving down to Prangin near Geneva. I said, oh? He said, talk to Danny Weber, the chief engineer. So I did. I went to the station. I said, Danny, I hear that you're selling these Siemens transmitters. He said, where did you find out about that? I said, well, Bob Tolman told me. Oh, no wonder. So we struck a deal. We got transmitters that cost a king's ransom for the proverbial song. Oh, it did cost us something, but Alfredo and I pitched in 50-50, and we bought one of the two transmitters. Later on, we bought the second one as a backup for the first one, but we started with one transmitter. And let me describe this transmitter. I'm trying to think about the photographs. Let's do the transmitter building first, the close-up with the car. So you can see the there it is, exactly. Thank you very much, Tammy. Doing a great job, by the way. It's not easy to follow me sometimes. There is a close-up of our transmitter building. A great hideout. And you see the open door there on the left. That was the transmitter room, a converted stall. They used to keep horses in there. And we had a 4-millimeter solid copper coaxial cable. The center conductor was 4 millimeters, rated at 20 kilowatts AM. We got that for free from the radio station. They had it in stock. They didn't need it, and they gave it to us. And the transmitter is inside that building there, where you can see right at the back of the car. You see the metal door, the gray door open. That was the transmitter. We had to build everything in there and renovate it and wire it and everything else. That was a job in itself. And you see up at the top of the roof, you see the antenna. Now, in the heyday, when we first started, it was 3 bands, multi-band dipole. We had 80, or rather 75 meters, the broadcast band. We had 41 meters, and we had 31 meters. We dropped 31 meters when the sunspots deteriorated, and we concentrated on 75 and 40 meters. I did the engineering for that. Alfredo and I worked on that a whole weekend. We put that station together technically in one weekend, and everything worked the first time. I remember going into the transmitter and switching it on the first time, and everything worked. And that evening, we were making announcements, and we got telephone calls from all the way from Sweden and so on. Tammy, if you can find that transmitter, Alfredo standing next to the transmitter, if you got that coming up, there he is. There's Alfredo. Now, you talk about a super ham station. That's exactly what it was. Alfredo there is my partner, or was, and the Siemens transmitter, it was absolutely a jewel, absolute dream. From 1.6 megahertz, 1600 kilohertz, to 30 megahertz, automatic band switching with a maximum of 8 seconds, automatic, tuning everything. Pi network tuning, we averaged 4 to 5 seconds. Rated at 10 kilowatts PEP, all modes. It would do AM, independent sideband, FSK, CW, and again, Bob Tolman enters the scene. Bob Tolman was a great fan of single sideband. And he said he was very much in favor of broadcast stations going sideband. And it never happened. The ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, had a protocol which was supposed to be followed. It was supposed to be introduced, but nobody did it. They said, oh, it's too expensive to convert and everything else, and people are used to AM, so we'll stick to AM. So Bob said, hey, you can get the best of both worlds. Run A3A, reduced carrier single sideband. He said, you'll get all the punch of sideband. People with a sideband receiver will be able to listen to it in sideband, but it's AM compatible. So the transitionary period for the that the ITU prescribed would have been minus 6 dB carrier reduction. And we thought that was a little bit too much, a bit too distorted. So we reduced our carrier about 4 dB. And it was absolutely perfect AM, but all the advantages of sideband. So we had the equivalent in terms of communication power. It was like a 30 kilowatt AM station. And we were heard all over the place. I heard it in South Africa when I was there once on a mission for the United Nations. I heard it in Arizona. We got reports from the Middle East, from Japan. That station got out like the proverbial bat out of hell. And it was just a super ham station, and it functioned beautifully. I'll show you the final. We have, I think this is speaking of the final, it's the last photograph, and Tammy, I think you know which one I mean. There we are. That is the final. It was one tube, one final tube, and it was a Siemens construction, and very expensive. The price was 5,000 euros per tube. We found a source for less than that, about 1,500. But of course, we had to take very good care of the tube. We ran it on the cool side. We ran about 1.5 kW carrier, and we modulated up to about 3.5, maybe 4K of sideband. And I did all the maintenance. So in the beginning, we had an engineer, a friend of mine from Swiss Radio International's transmitter station, who was the father of this transmitter. That was his job, to look after them. And he did initial maintenance and even repair. We had some lightning strikes down there, which took out our a lot of circuitry, the SWR bridge. I learned how to fix that myself, and I was doing all the maintenance, changing the finals and tuning them and everything else. So we got to know that transmitter very well. And it was absolutely it was like a fine watch. It was such a beautiful piece of technology. It became very familiar to me, and I did the maintenance on it. I have to tell you this little anecdote. Don't take offense, because it has to do with, some might call it a dirty trick played on the BBC World Service. Swiss Radio International used to use the frequency 3985 in the 75-meter band. Oh, by the way, I see there's one more photo. Sorry, Tammy, just before I continue. The close-up of the antenna feeder. That's one I missed here. There we go. Homemade job. as I said, a super ham station. And we were, that was the antenna feed. We were down to 2 antennas at the time, 2 dipoles, 75 and 41 meters. That's the top of the roof at the feed point. Okay, thank you very much. The dirty trick and the BBC World Service. Well, Swiss Radio International had used the frequency 3985 in the 75-meter broadcast band for many years. And they left that frequency, and we grabbed it. IRRS, the Italian Radio Relay Service, took it over. Now, I have to explain. Shortwave broadcasting in Italy at the time was technically on license, but there was a change in the law that you had to be registered with the Italian authorities. We even registered our frequencies with the ITU. We went to the HFCC, the High Frequency Coordinating Committee. Everything was done. We coordinated with the other broadcasters, and we were registered. And the ITU had us registered for 3985. Well, we started broadcasting, and that frequency worked beautifully, heard all over Europe during the wintertime. At one time, we were 18 hours a day, I think, on that frequency in the heyday of IRRS. One night, all of a sudden, the BBC World Service turned up on 3985 with 250 kW. I don't know from where, whether it was Wooferton or wherever. And they just plopped right on top of us. So we didn't know what to do. We protested, we wrote to them, and they disregarded our protests. We said we're registered. We showed them the documents. We're legal. We're a recognized registered station in Italy. You have no right to take over our frequency. They disregarded it. So what was the dirty trick? Only a ham would think of something like this. I was talking to Bob Toman about it again, and the two of us came up with, we concocted this idea, and we hatched the idea. What we did, we said, okay, when the BBC comes on, we will go 10 kilowatts upper sideband, pure sideband, no carrier, 10 kW PEP upper sideband. We did that. And I should mention that we were using very sophisticated audio processing equipment. I have it here. I wish I could show you. I have it in my shack. I have it here right now. The Orban Optimod 9105A HF, the one designed specifically for shortwave broadcasting, using very sophisticated clipping called Hilbert clipping, split band, multi-band processing. It is the non plus ultra of audio processing. The BBC World Service uses it, Voice of America, most of the other broadcasters. It gives you 8 dB of loudness compared to a non-processed signal. So we were running 10 kW pure single sideband plus Optimod audio processing. And when the BBC went on, we had our computer. The station was computerized in the later days. In the early days, I had to go down every weekend or every other weekend, alternating with Alfredo, to run the station and program it manually. But later days, it was completely computerized. And the computer switched on, BBC came on, and we came on. We went to 10 kW, PEP. You could not hear the BBC anymore. You could not understand a word they were saying. We dominated, our audio dominated over the BBC World Service with 250 kW. We had monitors, well-known names. I won't mention, keep them anonymous, who were giving us reports from Scandinavia, from the UK, from all over the place. They said, you can't read the BBC World Service. This went on about, I think, 10 to 14 days. Suddenly, one night, the BBC disappeared. They left the frequency. They gave up. Okay, well, that's pretty much the story. There's so much more to say. It's been a great run. I've had a lot of fun, and I guess if I went back, I wouldn't change anything. I just miss some of those days, and I must say, it's great to have amateur radio. It's a bit of a busman's holiday, but it's between my website and amateur radio. It really keeps me going, and it's the world's greatest hobby. I know everybody says that about their hobbies, but this is really special. We hams really are privileged to have a great hobby, making friends over the miles. You call CQ or you answer a CQ, you never know who you're going to talk to. I have talked to everybody, all walks of life, all kinds of people. You never know who is going to come up on the hook the next time. I hope our hobby will continue for a long time. Personally, I would like to see a little more rag chewing on the bands. Certainly over here in Europe, rag chewing seems to be a dying art, I'm sorry to say. I think in the UK, you're still good rag chewers. I always find somebody to talk to. But over here on the continent, it's so much, contests. And I'm sorry, I don't want to offend any contesters, but I have personally no use for contests. Years ago, they made some sense. You exchange names, information, QTH, power, antenna, and honest signal reports. And now you don't even know where they're located. You don't know what their power is. It's everything. Everybody's 5'9". They don't even give you an honest report. So I really, when the contesters are on, I'm off. Simple as that. I'm QRT. But there's a lot of that here on the continent. A lot of technical. Okay, it's a technical hobby. But, after you finish talking about your equipment and the antennas and what you're running and everything else, how about a little chit chat? It doesn't have to be a marathon QSO, but a few minutes, something about who you are, what you do, where you live, what the weather is like, It's not asking too much. That to me is the amateur radio that I was steeped in. That's my definition of it. One man's opinion, one ham's opinion. I know opinions may vary. But anyway, that's about it from this end. That's my final from beginning to end. And should there be any questions or comments, I'll be here to listen to them and to answer them if so be. Thank you again very, very much for inviting me here this evening. It's been a real pleasure and a great honor. And so the microphone back to media control.
Been a long time since that's been said to me. Thank you very much, Bob. I have to say, I didn't know you. I can't say I knew you years ago as a broadcaster, but you've definitely got that voice. And it must have been a wonderful thing to have the broadcasting side and your hobby, and then link the two together. Sometimes, I hear
really true.
Some people have got better voices than others for sideband and things like that, and for voice. But you've definitely got the voice there and all the experience to call on. Do you think it would work nowadays? If you could get a national broadcaster interested in ham radio and normal broadcast radio, do you think it would work? With the changes of technology that we've got now.
You're referring to broadcasting in particular?
Yeah. So would a broadcaster be interested in maybe, a program like you and Bob did?
No, that was a one-off. Everything is possible. First of all, shortwave would have to come back in a big way. That would be the precondition. There would have to be a revival of shortwave broadcasting. Should that happen, if that happened, then of course there would be interest again in how to improve reception, the need for technical tips about antennas, how to tune properly, how to improve reception. It could work again, but I would have to say there would have to be a revival of shortwave for that to happen. It was a golden era of shortwave. Whether it will come back again, I mean, really, who knows? Very difficult to say. With our world so unstable the way it is, anything could happen. You know, today all the eggs are in the internet basket. I think that's a mistake. If our world, God forbid, should get any more unstable than it is, maybe shortwave might come back as a possible option. But then again, look at all the stations, the infrastructure which has been destroyed. And it would take so much money, so much work to rebuild it again. And as much as I'm an idealist about shortwave, I'm also a realist. And I realize the chances are not great that shortwave will come back the way it was. There are still shortwave stations around. One chance that was missed was Digital Radio Mondiale. That was a very great technology that came up, maybe about 20 years ago. A lot of work was put into it. I've heard demonstrations of it. And it is absolutely unbelievable, the complaints about noisy interference on shortwave and fading and all that. Doesn't happen with digital shortwave, Digital Radio Mondiale, DRM. But unfortunately, the technology came too little too late. The sound is crystal clear like an FM station. But unfortunately, a few stations are using it, mainly as feeders, but the manufacturers never came out with receivers. So it was a chicken and the egg situation, a vicious circle, really. I mean, the broadcasters said, yeah, we could do it, but there are no receivers. And the receiver manufacturers said, we could do it, but there are no broadcasters. So I don't see it happening, David. I'm sorry to say.
No, I'm certainly with you, and also very much with you that sadly I think broadcasting, even as we know it through the airwaves, I think has got a very finite number of days, to be honest, with everybody going to streaming now. But anyway, we probably shouldn't dwell on that. We're talking about the past and your story and your history, and we shouldn't dwell too much on the downs of the future. As Bob said, if you've got a question or a comment or anything to make, and I know we've got a few here to read out to you, Bob, please do that now on Facebook or on BATC. We'll start with BATC and Tony G0MQG. Firstly, he said that I've got a Helicrafter. It's an S20R. That's what his model is. He said that it's sad that there isn't the number of shortwave broadcast stations that there once were when he started shortwave listening in the mid-1960s. But there are still some left for people like him to tune around and find, and perhaps some will return, he said. But like you said, it's hard to imagine them building those big transmitters and masts and kilowatts of power, isn't it?
Yeah, I think he'll have to. Tony, thanks for the point. Oh, I know exactly where you're at. Congratulations on that vintage piece of equipment. They're still good and they still run. I have a Hammerland HQ100 here, which goes back to about 1970, and it still works. It's a gem. It's a jewel, and these radios still work very well. I guess the only thing I could advise you to do would be to turn to DXing, SWL DXing. There's a challenge there. There are a few clubs. First of all, there's the European DX Council. The president of the European DX Council is a lady by the name of Chrissy Brand. I know Chrissy. She's a journalist, a former broadcaster herself. She's English. EDXC, European DX Council. There are other shortwave clubs. You can probably Google them, or whatever search engine you use. And there's still lots of tips about stations that are being heard. There is a resource. Let me suggest this. If you're on Facebook, Switzerland in Sound. That's my website. It has a Facebook page. I can't pull it up right now, but if you go to Switzerland in Sound on Facebook and scroll down under the postings, you'll see a tool that somebody put me onto. I forget who. It's really good. You can put in any frequency at any time, and it'll tell you what stations. Just about all active stations are there. What stations are active on that frequency at that given moment. You can also look according to station names. And that's Switzerland in Sound on Facebook. You'll find that resource there. And by the way, for your benefit and for everybody, if you need to contact me or would like to contact me, you can do it. I have an address on qrz.com. No problem at all. Yeah, what can I tell you? That's about it as far as that's concerned. I just wanted to mention a couple of stations stateside, which might be interesting. I'm not thinking of China Radio International. They have taken over shortwave. Just this quick aside, very clever they are, the Chinese. They waited very patiently for the Western stations to go QRT. And what did they do? They're now swamping the shortwave bands with China Radio International. Very subtle propaganda. Very, very clever they were. The only show in town, but there are a few others. A friend of mine, an old friend and former DXer with the American Radio, not Radio Relay League, sorry, the NARC, Association of North American Radio Clubs, Jeff White. I've known him for many years. Yeah, he's the owner of WRMI, Radio Miami International. They took over the transmitters of Family Radio in Lake Okeechobee, Central Florida. He's running a number of stations there, largely in Spanish, but he also does English. They're still active. Then there's someone else I know, a former pirate broadcaster from New York by the name of Alan Weiner. You'll also find an interview with him under the two Bobs on my website, switzerlandinsound.com. Don't confuse it with the Facebook page I mentioned. I mean, on my website, the real website, switzerlandinsound.com. WBCQ. I have an interview with Alan Weiner. It was done several years ago when they were constructing a 500 kilowatt super HF station with a rotatable curtain array. And I don't have to tell you how that signal gets out from the state of Maine. So you can probably pick them up in the UK without an antenna. They're that strong. That's an interesting source of all kinds of programming. A lot of, there's religious, there's political, there's eclectic programming and all kinds of stuff. So the stations are there, not like they used to be. That's true. But if you look, you will find them. Good luck.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Mike G4DYC now says, Bob, many thanks. Fascinating. Do you think shortwave BC will again come into its own? I don't know what BC, does he mean broadcast maybe? By that, I guess it's a similar question. But anyway, that's Mike G4DYC.
Well, yes, it is a similar question, but I guess I could try to answer it in a slightly different way. It really, it depends on the world, really. Frankly, at this moment, the motivation is not strong enough to go back to shortwave. I think what would have to happen, we would have to have more destructive and horrific events like wars, like Ukraine, like the Middle East. They could, like Africa, especially important parts of the world. And that would have to be accompanied by a cut in internet services, because the major former shortwave broadcasters still believe they can save a lot of money, and they do. They do save money. It's cheap to use the internet, no question about it. Great technology, if it works. But the problem with the internet is that if somebody doesn't like you, they literally pull the plug or throw a switch and you're gone. You cannot do anything about it. You cannot intervene. You cannot contradict that. The only thing that will get through is HF. Now, if we have more and more incidents of the cutting of internet services, more and more, then if we have more and more crises in the world, I could see the possibility, I'm trying to be careful, see the possibility that the decision makers might begin to review shortwave as an option. The transmitters are there. The BBC World Service still has a few. The Voice of America has some in mothballs. There are transmitters there. They're not all dismantled, dead and buried. I would see possibly in moments of increasing crises, the existing transmitters might be put on the air again. But do I think there would ever be a return to the golden age of shortwave like we knew in the 70s, 80s, 90s? To be realistic, I don't think we'll ever see those days again. But who knows? We just can never be sure.
Thanks, Bob. A slightly opposite view, as we all know, and as you said yourself, these have been your views, and but not everybody's views. Ralph 2M0RHT on Facebook says, when the 50-watt ham struggles to get recognised, why use a kilowatt to spoil our hobby?
I come across that a lot. I wouldn't say it spoils the hobby. Let me put it to you this way. There are different views. Pardon me. I am well aware of the argument, especially from in and from the UK, about lower power. I hear it all the time. You can do everything with 100 watts. You can do everything with 50 watts. Some people say you can do everything with 10 watts. I think that is a slight exaggeration in terms of reliable contacts, reliable communication, especially internationally. I will grant you, you're absolutely right, within the UK, and this is the optic of so many people, especially UK stations. They talk to the UK. Many of them are happy to talk only with the UK. They're not looking for anything further afield. And under those conditions, even 10 watts will do it, 50 will do it, 100 will do it. But I have to explain the situation we have here. First of all, I'm a rag chewer. And when you're rag chewing, you are expecting or asking a station to listen to usually long transmissions. We don't do 5/9 bye-bye QRZ. Rag chewing is exchanging information, chit-chat over longer periods. Now over here on the continent, and this is maybe not completely clear to some UK stations, it's a completely different ball game. I'm here in Switzerland, in the middle of the heart of Europe, of Western Europe. I'm at 2,500 feet altitude. I've got excellent HF conditions here. It's a dream for HF. But being in this location and having such a good location, I am bombarded. I mean, literally bombarded from all sides. I've got Italians running 4 kilowatts, 5 kilowatts. We have Spanish stations running high power. We have Eastern Europeans. We have Northern stations. And I can tell you, it is very similar to the days of shortwave broadcasting. It is a power race. It is a power game. And if I'm in a QSO with someone, if I'm running 100 watts here in the continent, I will be clobbered. I will not last more than a few minutes, because the only thing, like our friend Vladimir Putin, all some stations understand is power. And if I want to maintain a reliable communication, I have to dominate the frequency. And I don't know any other way to do it than with power and with audio processing. Audio processing is extremely important. You can accomplish a lot, especially using lower power. You can do a lot, and I advocate for audio processing. Under the two Bobs on my website, Switzerland in Sound, you'll find a paper I wrote about amateur radio processing. I cannot advocate this too strongly, especially when you're using low power. And I'm sorry, I don't mean it offensively, but 50 watts is low power by continental standards. You have, if you're trying to get through any distance or over here, you've got to be loud and you've got to be crystal clear and powerful. The other thing, of course, the most important part of any station is the antenna. And I know this is a problem, especially in the UK. You have planning permission problems. You have small properties, small gardens. You can't put up big beams. And this is a problem. I understand that. But the antenna is the most important part of the station. Now, if you don't have a beam, especially let's take 40 meters, 80 meters, who has a beam on those frequencies? All you can do is to raise your power and or increase your audio, your loudness of your audio. Those are the two weapons you've got. I have on 40 meters, I would have the room for a 40-meter beam here, but I don't want to put it up. I live in the middle of nowhere here. I have old farmhouses from the 18th century. I'm not going to offend the neighbors by putting up a thing like that. I do have a beam. I have a TA-33 WARC for the higher bands, for the HF bands, but on 40, I also have a wire. But to go back to my original point, where I am located here, if I ran 100 watts, I wouldn't last long, especially not on the 40-meter band. You probably don't agree with me, but at least I'm trying to explain my position over here and the position of many European continental hams.
Sure. Thank you, Bob. Roger G3LDI says he's the person who booked you, as you know, found you and booked you. At 8 years old, I found the shortwaves on my dad's old Murphy radio. All sorts of things could be heard in those days in the late 40s, but now it's only the DSL internet noise, so there's no fascination there, he says. Tony came back as well and said, I've always had a soft spot for vintage HF receivers and have several as part of my collection. I'm also restoring an HRO for a fellow club member at the moment. Malcolm G3PDH says, great talk, Bob. Do deliberate jamming stations still exist like they did way back over broadcast stations?
No, but they do exist. You hear them occasionally. Not like the old days. I made a reference before to the power game in shortwave broadcasting. That was one of the reasons. We all know, and I'm the first to admit that, without jamming under normal conditions, you should be able to go around the world with a reliable shortwave broadcast station with 20 kilowatts rather. That could be done, but you couldn't do it because of the jammers, because there were different kinds of jamming. We had the white noise jamming, we had the bubble jamming, and we had the more subtle kind of jamming where, for example, the Russians were great for doing this, moving to the next channel, moving too close to a station. The jamming did exist, so that's the reason why stations were running hundreds of kilowatts, not because they needed it to complete the circuit, as the engineers would say, but because they had to dominate. It goes back more or less to what I was just talking about a moment ago on amateur radio here on the continent. It's a power race. I didn't start it but I have no choice but to play the game if I want to be heard and stay on the air, especially as a rag chewer. No, you don't hear too much jamming. You do hear number stations still occasionally. I haven't heard many for a long time, or I haven't heard any for a long time. But jamming, I would say, not like during the Cold War. Some trouble spots in the world, especially in Asia, maybe in Africa, they still will use jammers occasionally, but I think the jamming is over pretty much in Western Europe, mainly because the Cold War, as we knew it, is over. We don't have the propaganda war the way we did. And beside that, in Eastern Europe, it was costing them a lot of money to run these jamming stations. And just a technical word about those jamming stations, they were not superpower stations. It was very clever what the Russians and the satellite republics were doing there. They were not running megawatts. This is a misconception. Oh, they have a few multi-megawatt stations there, but they're mainly over horizon radar. We hear a lot of them still on amateur radio. We hear them on shortwave broadcast frequencies. They're around. Iran is running them. We know that. The Russians are running them. We're not sure who else, but they are running megawatts, huge superpower stations. But they're not intentional jamming, not jamming per se, but they do tend to jam because they're very indiscriminate where they go. But as far as the Cold War sort of jamming, those stations are gone. They've been sold probably to Russian hams who are running 10 and 20 kilowatts. I know stations over there who do, because that was the power of those stations. They were not huge powerhouses, those jamming stations. What the Russians did, and also the other cities in the old Soviet Union, they had 10 and 20 kilowatt stations around the periphery of big cities. They weren't so concerned about the outback. But the cities, they would jam the frequencies coming in. They didn't need so much power. 10 kilowatts would do it to jam a frequency. And I have a feeling a lot of those jamming transmitters found their way to ham stations somewhere. But yeah, deliberate jamming the way we knew it in the good, bad old days, no, not so much of that. But over horizon radar, yeah, it is a form of jamming, albeit probably unintentional.
Bob, thank you. We did say that we promised you we'd try and finish by about 9 our time, because of course it's later for you. Just one other comment on the end here. Jim G3YLA said, excuse me, 5 watts QRP DXCC on 40 meters is still a big thrill, you know, he says. But thank you very much for the insights, fascinating, and lots of other wonderful compliments to you throughout. I don't want to miss anybody out really, but there's quite a lot of people who've been putting comments saying thank you very much for a fascinating talk, very thought-provoking as well. Bob, it's been a joy to have you.
Thank you.
It's been a joy to have you on NARC Live. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. And as people said, that they can always catch you on and contact you on your QRZ page. Bob, HB9ASQ, thanks very much indeed for joining us on NARC Live.
Well, David, thank you very much. And also my thanks to Tammy for doing such a great job with coordinating the photographs. And 5 watts QRP, I'm not against it. I absolutely, it's wonderful. I'm not knocking it. There's room for everybody in this hobby. I never was a DXer myself. I never ran really QRP, but I know it's fun. It's great fun. Not knocking it at all. But my interest is rag chewing, and I don't get on an awful lot. I'm not what I would call a professional ham. You know, some of us are there from morning till night, but I get on limited periods. And when I get on, I like to have a reliable rag chew and provide the best possible signal I can. But by all means, there is room for everybody. Run 100 milliwatts if you want. If that floats your boat, as they say, that's great, and I'm all for it. And chapeau, as the French say. Great that you've been able to achieve those great results. I'm not questioning it at all. It can be done. It can be done. I just don't have patience enough myself to do it.
All Right, Bob. On that note, thank you very much. Say lots of lovely compliments you can see on our Facebook page and on BATC. Once again, thanks very much for joining us tonight, and sorry that we're a little bit over the time we agreed.
Well, I'm amazed myself. I thought I wouldn't make it this long, but it's been so much fun. And I really appreciate the privilege of being able to talk to you tonight and tell the story. And I hope that I will meet as many people as possible on the air. I'm QRV on 40 meters, 20 meters, HB9ASQ. If you hear me, give me a call.
Yeah, and in fact, we had a mention from at least one person you talked to, Paul Gunther, who I think is from Britain but lives in Poland now. He says, a great talk. Hope to work you again when conditions are good. Thanks to you. Remember Paul's?
I know Paul.
You know Paul. Good. I can't try and remember his call sign. Sorry.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
G4,
Hello,
I know it's XBT, I think it is. But anyway,
right.
Many thanks again. Thanks, Bob. Take care.
Thank you all very, very much. It was a great pleasure and a great honor to talk to you.
And for us. Thank you.
7-3 from the Emmental, Switzerland.
Yeah.
And we make the cheese the real way.
Yeah.
With bacteria.
Right. Not with those paper punches that you saw earlier.
Right.
All right.
Cheers for now.
Thanks very much, Bob. Thank you.
Best of 73. Or as we used to say on the Swiss shortwave merry-go-round, this is Bob Tillman and Bob Zanotti saying goodbye, good DXing, and very best of 73s.
You've still got that voice, I tell you. I'm sure people will tell you that. Any producers watching, I'm sure will be interested. Thanks very much, Bob.
I'm out of the business.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
HB9ASQ, QRT.
Off and clear. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful. There we are. That's Bob, HB9ASQ. What a story. Just a time now to tell you what's coming up this week in the club. As I mentioned before, Saturday, the Koblenz at 10 o'clock. On Sunday at 1900, it's the GB2RS News on GB3MB. On Monday, we've got that talk as well by Donard, and I'll put details of that on the newsletter as well at CNS if you're interested in that, talking about loop antennas. But the Monday Night Net is also on GB3MB at 7:30, and at 8 o'clock, the 80 metre CW Net on 3.543 megahertz. And then next Wednesday, we won't be here online, we'll be in person at CNS School between 7 and 9:30 for an informal meeting, a social and bright sparks for our younger members. And don't forget to keep sending us those stories and your pictures and everything, and we'll see you again very soon for NARC Live. But until then, from Tammy M0TC.
Bye-bye.
And from me, David G7URP, take care, look after yourselves. Bye-bye.